All right, well, it is 1 minute after the hour, and so as to not take away from the session content, I want to begin by saying good morning to everyone here. My name is Megan Orlando. If we haven't met, I am ESIP's Community Director, and I'm here today both as your Zoom tech host and also as a co-organizer with my very esteemed colleague, Leslie Shih, Coordinator for the Community for Data Integration at the USGS. We're here today because ESIP is a space for sharing and also tackling technical challenges across agencies and across organizations. And we also believe that it should be a space to share other challenges across agencies and across organizations. So we've been holding these sessions for a while now. This is the third in a series. We're excited to see that participants keep showing up, so hopefully they continue to find value in sharing with one another, specifically around topics about developing and implementing the federal data strategies. We've intentionally kept these conversations very broad in order to allow for sharing on a wide range of topics and to get more folks into the conversation. But today we want to try to get a little bit narrower and explore how trust, the concept of trust, and how we can continue to collaborate across organizations, even if we need to implement our respective strategies in different ways. So with that, I will pass it to Leslie.
Thank you very much, Megan. I'm Leslie Shih. I'm, as Megan said, Community for Data Integration Coordinator at the USGS. And I just love the platform that ESIP provides so that people from different organizations can come together and share about what's on their mind and how to solve problems. So just a reminder, if you haven't yet, there's a welcome poll here at slido.com. You can either put in the event code or go to the Kiko chat tab. And let's take a quick look here. Please do go ahead and let us know, how familiar do you feel with the concept of data ethics? And we're going to talk about that a little bit more if you put a little bit or not at all. One thing I appreciate about ESIP is getting exposed to and learning about things that I may not think about on a daily basis. Okay, so I'm going to keep letting that go for a little bit and go back to the slides. You may be wondering, what are we discussing today? So to give you a preview here, this all started as a series to share between different agencies what are the data strategies, which in the past year or two and more, there's been a lot of discussion on different agencies developing these strategies, implementing the strategies, and there's a lot of questions and a lot of information to share. In past meetings, we've heard from different organizations, and we'll hear from a new one today, National Science Foundation. And we will align with the theme of the ESIP meeting to focus on trust and data ethics in federal data strategies and explore some future topics that may be of interest to our audience and our participants. And I do also want to say very clearly that we have our invited speakers, but even if you are not an invited speaker, we are interested in your experiences, questions about the data strategies. We thank our invited speakers for coming here to give their perspective, but by no means are we going to say theirs is the only perspective for that data from their agency. We've asked them to provide their perspective and are thankful for that, but please do bring your questions and your experiences. Okay, and we are going to come back to this key point again and again, which the broader goal we have is for ESIP and its members to continue to enable and support collaborations that span organizations, including different agencies. And right now we're looking at the particular topic of, we have these different data strategies and they may need to be implemented in different ways, but we still want to support these collaborations. Okay, so before we get to a little bit more audience input, I'll just talk a little bit more about what happened in the 2 previous meetings and some of the topics that came up. So in July 2023, in that first session, we tried to give a really quick overview of how did we get here to where many agencies have federal data strategies that have come out in the past year or two. And we went back to like, there's the overall US federal data strategy, which is not just science data, but all the data from the government. And then there were Office of Science and Technology policy memos came out. You may know them from Nelson and Holdren, those names for those memos. And that led to some public access plans for the different agencies, which then led to data strategies of the different agencies. So if all of those memos and strategies are a little bit confusing to you, you can go back and look at that quick summary. And we heard from USGS, US Department of Agriculture, EPA, NASA, and NOAA Fisheries, and we were very, very strict on the time in that first session. We did also like hearing from the audience what are the biggest barriers to implementing strategies, and heard many things. And also tried to concentrate on, now that we've had this first discussion, what are some takeaways and next steps? Then we wanted to keep the conversation going even in between ESIP meetings. So in November, we just had another add-on, and it was kind of a smaller group, not at the ESIP meeting, where we took a look at the compilation of the challenges that all of the different agencies were talking about. And there was a lot of overlap there and just a lot of challenges. And we also did some answering of the questions that came up in July from one agency to another. We heard from Department of Energy and also National Institutes of Health, and just reiterating, like, the speaker doesn't have to represent the entire agency, but one perspective from within the agency. And we'd definitely like to hear if there's new voices that you'd like to bring into the conversation. And we, of course, came up with even more topics and new topics around data discovery, hosting files to support public access plans, paths to data.gov, and what kind of policy or conversation is there about data analyzed with generative AI. So that's what set the stage for us today. And today you saw what our plan is, but before we go there, let's just do a little bit of audience input so we can get on the same page. So let's first look at this one, which is the first question that was out there on slido.com was, how familiar do you feel with the concept of data ethics? I myself put a little bit, so that is 70% of respondents. And we have the next highest is familiar, and then there's a little bit of very familiar and some not at all. And we welcome you all here today so we can learn more from each other. So Megan, I'm not sure if you are on the Slido, and maybe you can put the next question up.
Yes, and I just put the link in the chat as well, so folks can head there. And we'll note we only had 31 responses out of 48, so hoping for an even higher response rate with this question.
Yes, it's anonymous, and I love Slido, so please participate. So now, some of us know more than others, some of us know a little bit. Just looking for how our audience here today would briefly describe the concept of data ethics, because it is a really broad topic. Megan and I were saying, like, it's so broad, but we want to just have a conversation that is related to trust in government data. What are the data ethics principles involved, and how does this guide us on how we should implement our strategies? So thank you to those of you who are typing and sharing, doing what is right with the data, fairness to access, focusing on how the data is collected, shared, and maintained, sourced from authoritative places, mined in an ethical manner, stored in an accessible way, accurate. This is such a huge topic. I'm ready to learn more. Integrity, stewardship, trust, and consideration of exploitation. Guidelines on data usage and sharing. Moral and legal considerations for deciding how to manage and use data. Responsible use. Making sure data are robust and easily accessed. Intentional and transparent strategies to build trust. Accessibility, usability. Okay, understanding the life cycle of the data and checking that each piece in data gathering and processing is done in a way so as not to change the essence of the information. I am going to read all of these just because I'm finding it fascinating. Collecting, storing, analyzing, distributing data in a way that promotes truth but does not cause harm. Respecting the rights of data owners and the care principles, giving credit to the producers and providers. We should be aware of what our products are used for. Define red lines we don't want to cross. That could have a lot more discussion, and work with experts on technical ethics. Technical ethics. Okay, implications for collecting, sharing, using. Especially personal identifiable information. Privacy, consent, transparency, respect data ownership, consideration to the impact of release, and guidelines for making data as fair as possible, protecting personal information. Again, accessibility, rights, accuracy, and characterizing the physical world. Okay, this has implications for real people. All right, I'm gonna keep that open. So thank you so much for those who have given us now, we have like a baseline, but something to think about in our discussions. So we just did these 2 polls, and I just have one slide here. We're not going to go into a lecture or anything, but just thinking about ethics, data ethics, and big data ethics. So like I said, it's not a lecture, but thinking about ethics in general, you could think of it as which behavior is morally right, or what is right and wrong? What should you do? And then we're thinking about that in terms of data. And recently, people are applying it. They're saying, well, there is data ethics, but there's also, it's even more important with big data ethics because it's scaling up. There's so much information and data, the implications of data ethics are more. So just to put these principles in front of us for a little bit, some of the principles related to data ethics, ownership, transaction transparency, consent, privacy, currency, and openness, things that you hit on in sharing about what we're thinking of in data ethics. So thanks for sharing with us your thoughts. Okay, that was the end of the mini non-lecture. So we have here with us today some invited speakers and panelists. And just to set the table a little bit before we get into our main presentation, we asked our invited panelists to tell us where is trust and data ethics most present or relevant in their respective data strategies. So I'm just going to go through the slides. We don't have a slide from every panelist, but just to help set the table, I'm going to go to the first one, which is from the U.S. Geological Survey, and we have Viv Hutchison here. Viv, welcome, and can you share with us a bit about what you have here?
I can. I guess just as background, this is the way I answered the question was kind of referring back to the fact that the U.S. Geological Survey has this very robust set of what we call fundamental science practices. They're really policies. They're, policies for how we should be doing our federal science. And a sort of a primary component of that is this huge review and approval process that we have for the release of data and publications. And backed behind that is this group of people called Bureau Approving Officials. And they really have the last look at what we are releasing out. And because USGS, wants to make sure that they're standing behind the science. And the way we do that is by saying USGS is going to back everything that goes out. There is no scientist that says, oh, this is the opinion of me and not the USGS. It is always the opinion of the USGS, how our science is out. So that is the type of foundation, I guess, for building that trust, is that review and approval process that we have that's very thorough and in place. And so, that is highlighted in our data strategy. So it's just constantly referenced as, how we're going to make our data more open while adhering to our fundamental science practices. So keeping that, ability to be transparent in mind in our policies as well as our strategy moving forward. So those are just a few thoughts to get started.
Thank you, Viv, and thanks for bringing up sometimes there's tensions, like where it comes up. And I'm sorry, I did not give you a full introduction. Could you please state your position within the USGS?
Yeah. So my name is Viv Hutchison. I'm with the U.S. Geological Survey. My position is called Senior Data Advisor, and I work directly for the Associate Chief Data Officer in USGS. Yeah, so that's my current role.
Okay, thank you, Viv. And now we're moving on to a perspective from NOAA Fisheries, and we have Eli Holmes here. So Eli, could you please go ahead and also give a very brief, what is your role there?
Yep. Hi, I am Eli Holmes. I'm from NOAA Fisheries, and I am the lead of a kind of a new initiative called NIMS, or NOAA Fisheries Open Science. And this is part of a larger 3-year data modernization, and really large, that we have across our line office. So, like USGS, we have a very robust system for our internal review of science. Something that's kind of different for us is that we also have a regulatory side. So we are responsible for managing marine resources, and that's both, our fisheries, but also protected species. And an interesting side of our line office is that we have that regulatory wing, and we have the science side, and the science helps support regulatory decisions. It also does science that is not directly supporting particular decisions. And we keep these separate. And so our scientific integrity policy has a lot of clear guidelines to prevent interference with science. And so it has a lot of guidelines about that. We do have internal reviews, but science publication of our science can't be blocked just because the results of the research might be unpleasant for a regulatory decision that is happening. So I think that's kind of interesting that we have that. Also, when we are doing science, we have guidelines in place for how our sort of our regulatory side would be interacting with our teams, who are trying to keep them kind of a line between the science boards, groups that are helping advise a regulatory decision. So that's kind of an interesting side, I think, for us.
Thank you, Eli. And then we also have a slide here from NASA. Joel Scott wasn't able to join us here today, but he did send in some information, and I just thought it was really interesting, some of the wording that they have on their pages, saying that the information that NASA holds, including publications, data, and software, are a public trust to increase knowledge and serve the public good. So there's a little bit more detail here, but we will have to invite Joel to come talk to us more about that at a future meeting. And just a note that in our notes document, we do have a link to a compilation of all of the links and resources that the different agencies have shared with us over the 3 meetings. So, and we'll update it with the ones from this meeting. And that's just a good resource if you want to go back and see, like, what are they talking about? Where exactly do these things come up? Okay, I'm going to do a quick check with Megan to see if anything has come up that we need to answer before turning it over to Raleigh.
I don't see any questions to address at the moment, so I think we can move on.
Okay, great. Well, we are very happy to have Raleigh Martin here from the National Science Foundation to give that same overview that we asked the previous agency speakers to do. I will just let you watch his presentation instead of previewing it. So Raleigh, I'm going to stop sharing. If you could please go ahead and share your screen. That looks wonderful. Raleigh,
Excellent.
if you could just, say your role there at NSF, and I'll give you a quick time check around 8, okay? 8 minutes.
Okay, thanks so much, Leslie, for organizing this session. My apologies. I not only couldn't be there in the July 2023 meeting, but I also couldn't be there in the November 2023 meeting, so 3rd time's the charm. Yeah, so I'm going to talk briefly today to foster conversation around NSF's role in coordinating on federal data strategies, and hopefully provide some thoughts that relate to the current meeting topic related to trust and ethics. And my affiliation, I'm a program officer in the NSF Director for Geosciences, currently dividing my time between our Division of Earth Sciences and our new division of RISE, Research Innovation Synergies and Education, which is focused on cross-cutting initiatives in the geosciences. So in my opinion, there are kind of 2 governing data strategies for NSF. One is the official NSF data strategy. This is focused on NSF enterprise data. I will note that this document is a non-public document, although I was authorized by the staff related to our Chief Data Officer to share some of the major strategic goals, which relate to governance of NSF enterprise data, education and upskilling of our NSF workforce to be comfortable working with those data, data foundation in terms of tools to be comfortable understanding the data that are available to us as NSF staff. And fourthly, the analytics ecosystem, basically the tools available to utilize these data. One thing to keep in mind is that unlike some of the other science agencies here, NSF doesn't really conduct its own research internally, with the exception of our statistical agency, NCSES, which does education statistics. So most of the data that are addressed in terms of enterprise data for NSF are not necessarily the outcomes of scientific research. Instead, they typically relate to our proposal, award, and merit review process. As such, a lot of the data are Privacy Act protected information, so non-public information. And so, a big part of the data governance is maximizing the value to the NSF enterprise for using these data, while also being very careful to ensure those safeguards that exist because of the sensitivity of a lot of the data involved. So that's the official data strategy, but I would say equally important for the purpose of this discussion is NSF's public access plan, which was developed in response to the OSTP Nelson memo of 2022. This is focused on all of those data that are generated externally through NSF-funded research. Actually, more broadly, not just data, but also publications and other research products. This is a public-facing document, which you can find on NSF website. We have an NSF science advisor for public access, Martin Halbert, who's leading these efforts. And this relates to publications, scientific data, and also researcher responsibilities for managing these data. So in the prompts, there was a question about our data and customers. For the enterprise data, this is primarily information from our proposal and award process. The business uses primarily relate to kind of strategic program analyses to understand where our funds are going and what are the thematic trends. The governance is through our chief data officer. Recently, last year, we had hired in our geoscience directorate a data and analytics officer who's been super helpful in guiding us in the geosciences to make best use of these data sources. And our customers, I would say, primarily are NSF staff and our overseers who care about how we perform, including Congress and the public. Now looking at research data, I think this is a very different set of data and a different audience. These are the data generated by our grantees, which can span observational data, numerically generated data, sample-derived data, et cetera. Typically speaking, the business case for these research data is to advance the research that is conducted by our grantees, and as well as education on other broader impacts. Governance is through our proposal and award process. So each NSF proposal has to include a data management plan that is overseen by reviewers, by program officers. In addition, the governance relies heavily on NSF support for data repositories. I've listed some here at the bottom that are in the geosciences. We rely on those data repositories also to be a place for quality control and curation for researcher-generated data. And so, our customers would be the academic research community, but also I think increasingly, with the paradigm of fair data, we're interested in those downstream reuses of data that are maybe originally generated through NSF support. So in terms of challenges for enterprise data, I would say, and I'm sure you all can relate to this, just the limited IT staff capacity we have at NSF is a constant challenge. There is a widespread use of analytics tools within the NSF environment, balancing legal safeguards while also promoting innovation. These days with emerging AI tools is always a challenge. We're dealing with data from a variety of different sources with a variety of different tools. So making sure we're actually consistent and transparent to the extent we can be in terms of how we're analyzing those data is always a challenge. In terms of those research data extramurally generated, I would say the number one issue that I feel right now is just the ecosystem of data repositories that our grantees utilize. They're NSF funded, but also non-NSF funded repositories. There's the issue of US based versus international and how do we coordinate on that. And then also there's the issue of domain specific repositories that provide the customized curation service versus generalist repositories, which may not, but we see things like Zenodo, Figshare being widely used. Communicating and enforcing our data policies is always something we're working on improving, and adapting to the changing landscape. We hear a lot about AI these days. We also hear about certain data formats like images, which the data sizes are exploding. And how do we support our repositories and our researchers to manage that? So in terms of kind of where we're going, I don't really know with regard to the NSF internal data strategy, so I'm going to focus on our public access plan for external data. The OSTP memo came out in 2022, now 2 years ago. Our public access plan came out last year. We actually just closed an RFI for community input on this public access plan. We're expecting sometime this year there will be an update to our proposal and award policies and procedures guide, which is kind of the formal implementation of those new data policies. And then we expect that to come into effect sometime in 2025, affecting all grants that are made after a certain date in 2025. here are just some websites related to NSF data. I'm just putting these here because I assume these slides will be posted at some point. But finally, I wanted to close, some of the questions on my mind in discussion with other agencies. First, partnership. How do we improve coordination amongst our various activities and how we invest in data management resources and processes? So for example, I know there are data repositories that are funded by your agencies that are used by RPIs. Likewise, I know the USGS list of trusted repositories includes NSF-funded resources. So can we kind of coordinate more on how we're paying for those things? Which gets to the second point about, can we utilize some of these formal structures we have, like interagency agreements and MOUs to advance that joint coordination? Finally, at NSF, we are kind of focused a lot on the innovation. We have the flexibility to fund new and different types of resources that maybe wouldn't stand up to scrutiny in terms of use by a federal agency that has regulatory needs. But we would like to see ways that those kind of innovative new approaches and software that maybe are generated initially from NSF funding could find pathways to becoming trustworthy operational software, subject to the greater level of scrutiny they would need to have at another federal agency. And finally, I think underlying this, there's increasing role of private sector in data. And so I think that's just another discussion we need to have. So 9.5 minutes. Sorry, Leslie, for going over a little bit, but that completes my presentation.
Thank you so much, Raleigh. And I knew you were getting towards the end of those slides, so we let you go there. Now, we're going to have some discussion, and thank you for giving us that overview. Just want to remind you the different ways that you can contribute, people in the audience. Okay, so we have our session notes page, and I've copied the questions that Raleigh had on his last slide there into the notes right there. So that's one way that you can participate. If you'd like to just type something, it can be, you don't have to put your name, but if you want to leave your name, you can. So that's one place. If you would like to ask a question, Megan had put, if you want to ask it anonymously, Megan had put the link to the Slido Q&A there, and that's a great way to get a question in if you're a little bit shy and don't want to raise your hand. But we'll also entertain anything that is in our chat or raised hands. So that's many options there. We'll try to not lose track of anything. So I'll just give you a moment there to think if you would like to raise your hand with a question or enter it into any of the other spaces. And I will also say for our invited panelists, I don't know, Raleigh, are you able to put up that last slide again with your question so maybe we could
yeah, let me pull that up again. I'm not good at having multiple windows open, so just a second. Share screen. Okay, here it is.
Okay, yes, and some of these are formal discussion topics that are coming up, but I would like to just, and we're very flexible here. If a panelist wants to talk about one of these things, they can. I think I want to just start off the conversation, but Raleigh, you're asking these questions, and of course, the reason why you're asking it is because they're good in theory, but then all the details have to be worked out. I was wondering if on number 2, the joint funding, so these funding arrangements, if you could briefly talk about paths that have been pursued in the past that you know of, and what are the challenges and what would they be good for?
Sure. And you might be familiar with this, Leslie, but others may not. So one success story we had last year, one of the facilities that is supported through one of the programs I run at NSF Geoinformatics is called Open Topography. They make accessible, high resolution three-dimensional topographic data, and then provide certain value-add tools to help with analyzing those data. The confines of their grant previously was just to serve academic research communities, but one of their data sets actually came from USGS, the 3D elevation program. They were providing those data to academic communities, and then folks at USGS were like, well, wait a minute, this could be useful for our mission too. These are USGS data. And so we facilitated USGS through the National Cooperative Geological Mapping Program. I think I got that correct. Well, initially they came in through a CDI, Community for Data Integration pilot grant through your program, Leslie. And then after that kind of initial phase, we kind of formalized that partnership through an interagency agreement. So USGS started paying in to support an expanded customer base for that open topography service. So that's a specific example. And certainly I'd be open to other discussions of interagency agreements on some of our other data facilities if agencies are interested in expanding the scope of what those facilities are serving. An MOU would be a more formal, I don't have success with this yet, but this would be, if we have an MOU, for example, between NSF and USGS to cooperate on data support. We could write an annex to that MOU, specifically saying we're going to cooperate on this joint funding opportunity, and then we could jointly, through that mechanism, review and fund activities that come in via proposals to one of our agencies. So those are just kind of, to make it more tangible, ways in which this collaboration could occur.
Thanks, Raleigh. And now I'm going to check in with Megan and see, should I go ahead and share the Slido questions and we can get to those?
Yes, I think that's a good idea.
Okay. And Eli, do you have a follow-up to what was just said or a new question?
I'm not sure. Maybe it's kind of a new question. It's a comment on the question about number one there. How do we improve coordination? But I can bring that up later.
Okay. Well, since you suggested it, and your hand went up after these Slido questions, I guess the fair thing to do is for me to share this Slido screen. And, okay, share this window. So thanks, the questions are coming in, and I think we have time to get to many of these questions before moving into the first discussion topic, and it probably all overlaps anyhow. Okay. It's always fun reading these questions out loud on the fly and then sometimes being surprised. So first question at the top. Curious about whether or how agencies are explicitly discussing the so-called Evidence Act in their data strategies or related data efforts, from Steve Young. Okay, this one is very specific, so I'm going to leave it. If anyone here would like to give a quick answer to that, you can. Otherwise, we're going to mark this one down to ask all of our agency reps. And yeah, I'm gonna open to see if anyone would like to address this one. It may be one that we need to go check on and come back later, but the good thing is this is all here for our documented. All right, Eli, thank you.
I think I have been the only one I have heard talking about the Evidence Act when I've been giving presentations at NOAA Fisheries. Like I said in my intro, we do have a regulatory side, so like EPA does. And so I have been harping on that. So like, hey, look what happened with EPA. But I haven't seen explicit discussion. Probably somebody should summarize what the Evidence Act is, perhaps, for others.
I see Viv's hand up there, and I'm not going to put her on the spot to do a quick summary, but if you'd like to, you can, or you can just say what your answer is, because it's very complicated.
It is. I mean, I'll probably get it wrong. The Evidence Act has like 3 different parts, but the part that pertains to, part of it's like, oh, you need to have, each agency needs to have a chief data officer, different things like that are explained, but there's also this whole section of it incorporated the Open Data Act. And so that is where we kind of, focus for USGS in terms of our data strategy relationship to the Evidence Act, as like Evidence Act is out here saying, okay, now it's law that we need to make our data as public as possible. So let's try to figure out the best ways to do that. So that gets incorporated into our public access plan at USGS, and also as kind of a foundational principle, I guess, for the data strategy within USGS. So that's a little bit of a high level answer, but it's definitely mentioned and incorporated because and I think it's a great thing to be able to lean on when you're trying to change culture, from, at one point in time, we were sticking data in the desk drawer, right? on a disk drive or something. And now data is going into repositories, made more public. Like, this is the way the culture is moving towards. So that law is very, I think, foundational to support that culture shift.
Okay, thank you. And this is why I said it's kind of fun just reading the questions right out. Thank you for those of you who are putting the thumbs up so I can kind of see the priority. And then also I'm gonna ask Megan, did you see one that may not be at the top of the question list here that you think should be addressed next?
Yeah, I think that we should go with the upvotes. Actually, the couple of the ones that have risen to the top are look particularly intriguing.
All right, so we'll just go with this one that is related to Raleigh's questions. For the private sector, access to repositories can disappear if they aren't supported by funding or if the company's mission changes. Is it safe to publish with them? Raleigh, maybe you could take a first cut at this.
Yeah, I would say this gets to a broader challenge in general, which is the sustainability of data repositories, even for our non-private sector repositories, for example, that are grant funded by NSF. It's a persistent question of like, okay, you have a grant for a certain period of time, presumably your grant could be renewed, but there's no guarantees. At least for our NSF funded repositories, for many of them, we put a condition of the funding is that there be some kind of sustainability plan, in case the funds do not continue. But I think for any entity that's hosting a data repository, that's always a question of how do you sustain it? And I think that's something that's built into, some of these principles, like the trust principles. I think the S is sustainability. So yeah, I think this goes beyond just the private sector.
Thanks, Raleigh. Okay, I would like to make a little space here if anyone else wants to address that, and then I'm going to do another kind of NSF focus question. And for the more general questions, I think I'm going to save that until the general discussion. Does that sound like a okay plan, Megan?
Yes, proceed.
Okay. So any other comments on the private sector and safety of publishing data there?
This is Stephen Kleen. I have a comment. The satellite data for commercial vendors, they have, their license has an option where they have to offer it to like USGS to archive it should they want to delete their archive. I don't know how much that's enforced, but that's just an option for US companies.
Okay, that's an example of something that maybe can be looked. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, I wanted to get to another question for Raleigh. So how about this one, the second one? How does NSF funded research data management compare to NASA, NOAA, and USGS? We might need a group answer here, but NSF has a lack of repository structures and strategies, and data management seems more ad hoc. I don't know, maybe just a discussion of what's said here. We can't do like a very detailed compare and contrast here, but Raleigh, do you want to respond to this one? And then we'll allow a little bit of discussion here. What are the differences?
Yeah, so I'll just say high level, the current state of things at NSF is that decisions about how to fund data infrastructure occur at the directorate and division level. And so there is a highly heterogeneous framework for how that has been supported at NSF across those units. I would disagree with the notion that there's a lack of repository structures. That I think there is actually plenty of support. Whether it's sufficient or not is, I'm not sure. Whether, I would agree though that it is a very heterogeneous environment.
Okay, Eli or Viv?
Well, USGS has a pretty robust, I think, data management sort of program. We have some USGS funded repositories that one of which is sort of open and will accept, any USGS data that needs to be released. There's others that are specific to certain data types and that kind of thing. And then, as I mentioned before, we have all this kind of fundamental science practices that all scientists have to go through in order to manage their data through the process, the review and approval process before it's released. Yeah, I was just trying to think. I think NSF is funding others to do research and has actually led the way with data management planning. I think NSF was one of the first to say, if you want money from us, you need to have a data management plan. And so I think that's very helpful for other agencies, including USGS, have that leadership of that data management planning. USGS now requires that as well, because researchers may want to put data in non-USGS repositories, as was mentioned earlier by Raleigh. So, but I just think that piece of it, that planning piece, is incredibly important in terms of what repository is going to go into, how well is that one supported, that type of thing.
Thanks, Viv. And moving on to Eli.
Yeah, it feels to me like, it's not just like across NSF, but just across the federal agencies as a whole, that we're really fragmented in terms of our data repositories. And yes, it's true that NASA, NOAA, and USGS do have big data repositories that they manage, but they are separate, right? And at least for NOAA, it's more kind of certain types of data go into that repository. I'll talk about that more later. And I compare this with, when I go on to, say, the Open Air project that the EU has, and it just feels like, that's so much nicer. Like they coordinate together, and like their data repository can stay cutting edge, and their access can stay cutting edge in terms of like, how do you access the data? How do you coordinate your metadata together? How do you adapt to us moving into the cloud and having cloud optimized data formats? It just, like in our discussions, because I'm involved with these kind of discussions on the periphery with NOAA Fisheries, I know how hard it is to stay up to date with all that. And it's just, there's so much overhead of just the underlying infrastructure to stay really cutting edge in your data delivery. So I think that fragmentation hurts us personally.
Well, we are working on getting more sharing across in forums like this and many others. Okay, so thank you of course, we always have more questions and not enough time, so I need to do my job and move us on to topic 1. And I'm going to share this topic up on here. Okay, so we have 2 major topics we'd like to make sure we hit on a little bit. And we have some slides that have been shared with us. So let's move on to topic 1, but I'd like to also say that this topic is also open now in Slido. So if you're in the audience and you're saying, hey, I have an experience with this, or I have an idea, or I have something I've been trying to do, but it hasn't happened yet because such and such, that's something that you can share in the Slido or in the notes document so that we can learn from you as well. So this topic is one that Raleigh brought up. How can we improve coordination among agencies in investing in data management resources to support data strategies? So I think this kind of, if you're thinking back to our theme, we want to enable collaboration. We want to kind of do the right thing and use our resources wisely. So what are some ideas for that? And I'm going to move to the first slide, which Eli shared with us. And if you could talk about this for a minute or 2, Eli. Oops, I'm going back, don't worry. There.
Yeah, this is just off the top of my head of kind of things that I thought when we have these discussions have been really helpful for me, in attending the past ones. So so first off is actual examples of the agreements. I have been involved in preparing authorization to use policies, and it's actually not that easy to write them up. So seeing how other agencies have done it and what has worked in terms of going through all the hurdles we have to go through, or the approaches. Like sometimes you find out, hey, you had a letter of agreement with this repository and you're taking that approach, and that is super helpful. Also examples for approaches for new types of data. That's been something that's that is always a challenge, right? We're getting all these new types of data. I gave the example of cloud optimized data, but there's other kinds of data that's coming up. So like machine learning data. And certainly we, like each agency will have solutions, but hearing in these settings what's worked and hasn't worked in other agencies, I think is super helpful. And then the examples of success stories. So one of the things I love about these discussions is like we can kind of dig in to the things that worked and that didn't work. If you're giving a polished presentation on some initiative, or say, initiative like, let's say, a data repository. Like if you're giving kind of a presentation on that, you're probably going to give the nice version, everything worked, rah, it was all a big success. But, real life is never really like that. There's lots of hiccups. And what I love in these sessions is that we can talk really openly about, oh, yeah, well, yeah, we did this. It kind of worked, but don't follow our example, right? You can say those kind of things here, and then we learn from each other and we have those conversations. Well, why do you say that? What is it about that didn't work? I think another thing is like talking about success. How did you measure success? And so you're getting ideas. So, all right.
Thank you for keeping that brief but informative, Eli. We do have some things that have come in from Slido. So I'm going to, again, check in with co-convener Megan to see if there's something that we would like to highlight from that list. Maybe that clarification question.
Yeah, can you please clarify what you mean by investment in resources? Is this funding, in-kind staff support, or other? The ask is different for different kinds of resources.
And maybe Raleigh, you could take the first cut at that.
Yeah, I would say all of the above. I think obviously, funding money is important, but money can go in multiple directions. It can go to extramural grants in the case of NSF, or contracts in the case of some other federal agencies, but it also goes to paying for FTEs for federal staff to do this work. So I think yes, investment in all ways.
And does anyone else here want to note what is their priority, maybe like a priority or something that they, of the different things that Raleigh said, those are all included. Does anyone have, but especially in this, that they would like to share? Okay, it is all needed. So I think we should, what do you think, Megan? Keep going on some of these comments?
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff here. I do see one for wish list for coordinating further better ways to connect with other agencies remotely, keeping conversations going year round instead of just during conferences. You're here.
And I feel like that's related to one of the questions maybe we can discuss here, like what's the role of these interagency working groups? And maybe they're making progress in some areas that we could highlight more perhaps and learn from, but I'm not an expert on this, so I couldn't start listing some off. So I'm wondering if either the person who asked that question or someone here in the audience or one of the panelists wants to say something about the role of interagency groups, and if that's something that we could be looking at a bit more to help our goal.
Hey, this is Rama. I was the one who asked that question. And, in the old times, there was something called IWG-DMGC, Interagency Working Group for Data Management. And then it took different incarnations over time. And I'm somewhat familiar with the USGCRP, where there was a global change information system that was developed, and that was a very successful effort. And I was just wondering if those kinds of efforts should be looked into. Probably, since this is an interagency discussion, there must be some people who have been involved in such working groups. I have never been involved in, but I have watched it over time. So the question is, what are they doing there that that should be brought into this discussion?
Thank you, Rama. I'm going to check to see, Sky, is your hand raised for this topic or a new one?
Yeah, for this topic. So yeah, I think a couple quick things. Rama, good points there. One area that I think we had some good success a number of years ago was really through the U.S. Group on Earth Observations, particularly between USGS, NOAA, and NASA, where it relates to our satellite observation networks, as well as some of our ground-based in situ networks. Through the work that we did there and establishing a number of high-level strategic policies, I saw us set some things in motion that had deep impacts throughout all three of those organizations in terms of the technologies that we employed, the interoperability between the data that's coming out of those observation networks, really penetrating throughout the organization. And I think that happened because of dedicated work, at that group on Earth observations, as well as, deep penetration into the organizations. And I think your comment about the GCIS is actually really timely and interesting. That's something that we have all contributed to, those of us who contributed to the National Climate Assessments and the National Climate Health Assessment over the last number of years, since 2012, 2014 or so, when that came out. But I think we can be thinking toward how we really operationalize our connections into that knowledge graph that the GCIS represented. And we have a good opportunity through the National Nature Assessment that's going on now, the broader agencies that will be involved in contributing to that, I think we have an opportunity to really think about how we can have operational graphs within our organizations that contribute directly to the larger GCIS graph, as opposed to that being a point in time thing that's built specifically by the GCRP for the highly influential scientific assessments. So thank you.
All right, Sky, thank you. I want to kind of first check in with Megan to see if there's another thing that we might highlight, or would you recommend circling back to Raleigh to get comments on? He put forth the question and some things came at us. What does he think? So Megan,
Yeah,
tell me.
there are a lot of nuggets here. I really encourage everyone to go read, all of the responses. I think there's some good reminders here about just how urgent this work is, and that this has real implications for people and their lives too. So I think it would be good to move back to Raleigh, but there's so much we should follow up on here. And I'm personally curious, how formal does this need to be, and what are the pros and cons of formalizing this kind of collaboration, and in terms of protecting it as a safe space to share what has worked and what hasn't worked, etc.
Thanks, Megan. Okay, Raleigh, on to you.
Yeah, I can just jump in with a brief observation about interagency working groups. And I think this is going to align somewhat with what Sky said, which is my experience with those types of interagency working groups is they're really good at providing high level alignment between agencies to say, okay, we all agree as agencies we need to work on this. So I mean, for example, for open science, there's a subcommittee of open science that is, federal wide. And they were basically, behind the Nelson memo and the implementation of that. But at the end of the day, I mean, they have limited bandwidth and time. And so the question is, well, once this high level agreement has been struck among agencies, how do you then go into the trenches to figure out the details of how that actually happens in practice? I think establishing those mechanisms where there's sustained coordination among staff at the ground level in agencies. And there are many examples of where that's been successful, but I think that's the difference between, just yet another, white paper document policy going out there versus actual tangible coordination and change.
And Raleigh, are you ready to move on to the next topic? Okay. It's a group decision here. Okay, so now I go forward, and just a thank you to those of you who shared an idea in the Slido or in the notes document, because we do go back to those when we are thinking about future interactions. So another topic that kind of came up as we were organizing this session and thinking about this general theme is, where do practitioners go for guidance on releasing data under new public access plans? So there's some details to that. There's been questions about if there are co-funded projects or if there's sensitive or confidential data, like where do you go to find out more, or what has been done in this area before? So I'm going to first go through the slides and also start that question in the Slido in case you have, oh, nope, wrong one.
It was already done.
You had done it already. Okay, thank you, Megan. I can't read anything. So this question is now up on the Slido. If you have experiences to share about successes or challenges for co-funded projects from different agencies or organizations, whose policies do you follow? Do you have to follow like 5 different policies? Or how about sensitive or confidential data? And with that, I think I advanced the slide. And first up, we have a slide here from Viv.
Sure. This kind of touches on what I've already mentioned, but USGS has a lot of places to go to figure out how to get guidance on releasing data. The public access plan itself is published out on the USGS website. We also have a huge set of fundamental science practices, which are those policies. And then I did want to just mention the data management website, which is a place that's a public website. but USGS can go and look at that for ideas on how to implement certain pieces of that. How do I start my data management plan? How do I actually release this data? Where do I put it? You know, things like that are kind of answered. It's based on the data life cycle. I did just stick a challenge there that we've been working on as USGS. We're trying to figure out how to implement the public access plan. There are updates to it. We largely have a lot in place, but there's certain pieces in the updated plan that need new implementation. And so one thing we've been kind of grappling with on the data side is how you define federally funded. And that kind of reaches into the whole, you know, doing things with partners, right? And if they're funding us, if it's a non-federal agency, what does that mean? If it, you know, if it's partially funded by USGS and partially from a non-federal agency, what does that mean? If it's agency to agency, that type of thing. And so we've been kind of trying to think about that. And it's evident that the interpretation is sort of varied across the Bureau. So we're trying to figure out that piece of things as we move forward with implementation. So I thought I'd just mention that if anyone had any bright ideas, that would be awesome.
Thank you, Viv. I think we'll keep a pin in that question. Hopefully, if anyone has anything to share about that, you can do so in the various places and we may come back to you, but I do want to next go to the slides that were contributed by Eli on this topic. And Eli, I'd say that you can go about 5 minutes on your slides. Oops, and I will try to stop accidentally advancing the slides, but when you say so, I will advance.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Leslie. So I am also the PAR, Public Access to Research Results representative for NOAA Fisheries on a NOAA working group that is working to update our agency PAR policies in response to the Nelson Memo. If you have not read the Nelson Memo, I really encourage you to read it. It's a very big change, actually, from the sort of PAR 1.0 memo, the first memo that came out 2013. Has very sweeping implications for federally funded science. So a key thing, what I'm just going to focus on kind of one aspect of this, and that is the aspect that is that the data underlying federally funded research needs to be made publicly available at the time of publication and with persistent identifiers. So like a DOI. A DOI is a type of persistent identifier, but that's kind of one that people are really familiar with. All right, so let's just focus on that, and really focusing just on actually on another narrow aspect, which is publications. And in our working group, this is kind of like the first really, you know, the low-hanging fruit is that publications, we want to have the data underlying our scientific publications to be made available at the time of publication. And so when we talked about why our own research laboratories, our own scientists, so I mean federal scientists, NOAA fisheries scientists who are working at science centers, they are publishing papers. So this is like, if you look at their performance plan, publication of papers, scientific outreach will be the dominant part of their performance plan. That is what they are hired to do, is do research and publish research. So anyway, focusing on those people, my sense, you know, being on the working group was that others thought, well, they don't want, these scientists don't want to publish the data. Like, they're not going to comply because there's some kind of resistance to publishing data. And as a scientist who publishes papers. I was like, that makes literally no sense. It's 2023. Most journals require that you make the data available with the publication public in some way. You make it accessible. Like, I thought that that just doesn't make sense to me, that there would be resistance from the scientists to share data. Like, they may have confidential data, or they may have reasons they can't share the data, but like, if you're publishing, there's generally requirements for that. So I felt
Give you
like,
a
well,
friendly time check, Eli, to
Yeah.
keep going through the slides.
okay. So what I did was organize a listening sessions with our scientists to hear from them why, or what would be the barriers. Okay, next slide. And so far I've held maybe 5 of these, and there's some really common challenges, and that is this thing that keeps coming up is a disconnect between our federal mandates and the tools that the actual federal scientists have. And they kind of come up in kind of 2 things: lack of local knowledge. That local means like the support they have at their center, and the people who need to support them. Those people are not aware of PAR. Lack of knowledge regarding data archiving for publications. So we have archiving for our observing systems, but I'm talking about something a little bit different, publications. And so just a lack of knowledge of like, what are the different real options that people use for publications? And then a real problem with getting persistent identifiers for data if they are told you need to use a NOAA. I don't want to say NOAA repository. Sometimes it's also said, oh, it has to be on a federal server. So then maybe they're providing it like at a server at their office, which, right, that's not a data repository, really. So, and then also like they're often running into these circular messages of, you must do this, talk to that person. You talk to that person. No, you can't do that. I can't help you. Okay, and they go back. Yeah, but I'm required to do that. Sorry, can't help you. And so they are running into these circles. So we have problems at the local level solving barriers to publication of data. Okay, I think I had one more slide, but I'm going to stop there. Oh yeah, and these were the key questions. We were kind of surprised that most of them had not heard of PAR, honestly. And very few had heard about our official NOAA data repository. That was kind of shocking, like very, very few. Most of them, however, had made data, they had all made their data available in their last 3 publications, unless there was a reason they could not. For example, it was confidential data.
Okay, Eli, good. Thank you. We allowed our panelists, if there was a specific topic they wanted to share more about, we had time for that today. So thanks for sharing with us what you've been hearing. And I believe some of us can nod our heads and think about all these communication things that we are trying to do. So let me see what is next. We want to kind of help everyone here make sense of what they heard here today. And we have information in many different places. So I'm just going to quickly check and say thank you to those who have been adding notes into the document. I think I may have heard that it was maybe hard to add to or something, but it should be fixed now if you were trying to type something in. Megan reminded me that this is a to be continued discussion. A lot of the things are to be continued into perpetuity. But first, let me check the Slido to see for this topic if there's anything we'd like to highlight. And after this topic 2 wrap up, we will again take a look and have a chance for you to think about what you heard and if there's something that you latched onto that you'd like to share. So yeah, not to put you on the spot, Megan, but in looking at the Slido, is there something that you would like to raise from this topic?
Yeah, I mean, there's a thought from Dave Jones about how research data can be more useful to operational decision makers. Only a couple of comments on this topic, but that one's at the top.
Okay. I was going to say, share those successes on figuring out how to handle co-funded projects. I'm going to say, is there anything that one of our invited speakers would like to add about this topic or what they've heard here today? And I'm going to call on you. So I will start with Raleigh.
Yeah, so I think this is a complicated one. I think what actually happens in practice for co-funded projects is that each agency just kind of looks at it from their own perspective. So for NSF, if we get a proposal and we award it and there's a collaborator identified from USGS, we don't really care what the USGS policies, as long as the grantee on that grant is following the NSF policies. We trust that, you know, if there's a USGS nexus, that scientist who's the collaborator is also, you know, in consultation with their agency policies. But I get how that runs into, like, Eli, as you were describing, you know, folks getting the runaround because they're, you know, asking 10 different people and getting 20 different answers. It's not always the easiest situation.
Thanks, Raleigh. And moving to Viv, and again, thank you, panelists, for being here and having me call on you to come up with answers and responses to these difficult questions. So, Viv.
Well, I did mention this when I was talking about onto my slide about sort of defining what is federally funded, and that really goes back to entering into these partnerships. I think we're coming to the conclusion that it's really very much agreement based, right? And so these agreements need to be saying who's going to be responsible for what data and how it will be made public. If that is something that you're, you know, as a federal bureau, we need to have a part of. Some pieces of this sensitive data, confidential data, is not going to be able to be shared, right? But there still needs to be agreement between the parties as to how that data will be protected and that type of thing. So I think I'm coming back to the data management plan accompanied by the formal agreement between two entities participating in a partnership involving data, and that being the solution to how, you know, how this is actually going to work. Yeah, so those are just some thoughts.
Okay, thank you. What I'm going to do now is just fast forward to our goal that we put up at the beginning of the session. And Megan, maybe you could release the final question that we will put out to anyone in the audience that would like to contribute. So we heard a lot today from several perspectives, but I know that, you know, we always know these aren't all the perspectives. We would love to hear from you something that excited you or something that you think we should follow up on in future discussions. And that includes if there's a voice that you think should be included in some of these discussions that we haven't reached out to yet, or just like remaining questions, or just something cool that you learned. And we can use that when we figure out what can we do next to, we've set the stage, we can get people together to work on some of these things. There have been so many ideas here today. Okay, so Megan, you are here, and I would like to have you and I maybe just like say a few things. Maybe we can answer this question, right? And that will help people figure out how they would like to answer that question. So this is
I
great.
think there are 7 people currently writing ideas also. I think that, yeah, we should not be limiting to federal agencies. That is a good point.
Yeah, we should, let's get other ideas of what other discussions can be adjacent or combined. Yeah, ESIP is for that, for those collaborations.
I think there's also some strategy here too, in terms of, you know, picking moments to be broad and picking moments to, you know, get hyper focused and zoom in on very specific things, you know, where we might lose a few people at those specific moments because they're not as interested in that topic, but not being afraid to kind of zoom in and zoom out as needed. If that balances the practical and the broader.
And I also hope that maybe just if you are here in this session and you see other people in the attendee list, you know, in addition to our speakers, those are people that you can maybe reach out to or say, oh, this person had an interest in this topic. And it might be someone who would be of interest to meeting. Or for instance, in the coffee networking breaks next tomorrow, if you remember someone who was here and you want to ask them about this topic. Okay, so it's always hard to try to wrap up a discussion like this, but Megan, what do you say about just allowing our invited speakers, if they want to say anything in closing, as something we should do?
Or any closing thoughts at all?
Yeah, any closing thoughts? So I'm just laughing because I can see the panelists' faces and they're probably like, you didn't warn me about this, Leslie, but I think I will first go to Eli.
Oh, sorry. What am I?
This just any
Me?
closing thoughts, because we've reached very close to the end of
Oh.
this session and we've had a lot of ideas shared. And just as someone who has been part of these discussions, if you have any, you know, wish list of where to go on or some comment about today's discussion.
Yeah, well, I mean, my closing thought is really kind of general. I think these have been really useful, and thanks for you know, organizing, Leslie, and kind of being the driving force.
And Megan.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. These panelists have suffered a lot from our time constraints and our asks and all of this. So thank you. And yes, I'll go next to Viv.
Well, I agree with what Eli just said. I think these discussions have been really helpful, and I think it helps to kind of hone, you know, your personal involvement in your agency or whatever, and speaking with other agencies that are working on the same type of thing is very helpful. I mean, one thing I learned today is like many of these challenges we're all facing the same ones. And I put in the Slido there that maybe one way of furthering some of this conversation is we could have a couple of smaller meetings between some of the people that are leading these efforts in the agencies, and then come back as a means of reporting back out. You know, here are some of the things that we talked about, ways we could share approaches to various things that we're facing in our individual agencies. And then, you know, use that as an impetus for more discussion in this form, which I think is extremely helpful. So that's my closing thought, Leslie.
Thank you, Viv. And moving to Raleigh.
Yeah, I think I would just add thank you for convening this group. I think this has been a very productive conversation. And I think that signals that if this conversation is continued, it doesn't have to be a formal venue, but just, you know, continuing to bring together this set of folks to continue delving into these topics. I think we could come up with some interesting tangible ideas for progress.
Thanks, Raleigh. And I'm going to, one of the questions in the Slido was how to get more involved. And I'd say, if you are here right now and you want to play a larger role in these discussions, please get in touch with me or Megan or put something into the notes document. It's true that when we are putting together these sessions, sometimes we're like, who can we ask? So we should be clear, this is an open discussion and we'll try to focus it on what we started as our goal, but we want to hear from everyone who's interested. So a big thank you to everyone who came to listen, contribute. I hope you learned something, and I'm going to turn it over to Megan to see if she has any final announcements or.
No, I think this sounds great. A couple of closing thoughts. I mean, I think we've seen and heard enough interest here today and in past sessions. Leslie, we should think about how we can help folks to get more involved. Maybe we need a mailing list or some kind of way to just make sure we're not making it difficult for people to get involved. But I just want to say thank you also to everybody, and remind you that we have another session track coming up this afternoon, and then we have the research showcase at 4 p.m. Eastern, which is my favorite component of the virtual ESIP meeting. I think it mimics, like Susan said yesterday, the in-person poster session more than you might expect. So please, if you are able, please do show up and take part in that. But otherwise, thank you, Leslie, and thank you everyone else.
Thanks. See you at the next session. Bye.